So, let's talk about Schopenhauer. When you hear that name, your mind probably jumps straight to pessimism, right? But what if this famous 19th century philosopher wasn't just some downer? What if he was actually a super practical thinker with a surprisingly modern guide to living a more contented life? That's what we're going to dig into here, pulling out his real-world wisdom for navigating life as it is, not as we wish it was.
It all really starts with this one question that, let's be honest, kind of haunts all of us. Why does real, lasting happiness always feel like it's just around the corner, just out of reach? We're always chasing it, planning for it, but it feels like we're stuck on a treadmill. Well, this is the exact problem Schopenhauer decided to tackle head-on.
And this quote right here, this gets to the very heart of his whole philosophy. Schopenhauer believed that life isn't some prize you win or a puzzle you solve to get maximum pleasure. Nope. For him, it's an experience you have to go through to learn some fundamental truths about yourself and the world. Truths, that you just couldn't get any other way.
Okay, so here's the game plan. First, we're going to look at the illusions we all chase. Then, we'll turn inward to the constant battle happening inside of us. After that, we'll get into his brutally honest take on other people and the random forces that run our lives. And finally, we'll get to the good stuff, his practical path to what he calls contentment.
All right, first up, chasing life's phantoms. This is all about Schopenhauer's diagnosis of why our hunt for happiness so often just ends in disappointment.
Most of us go through life with this underlying belief that we can somehow make it perfect. But Schopenhauer says, hold on, we're not actually chasing happiness or truth. We're chasing phantoms, just shadows of them. And here's the real kicker. He says those shadows are as close as we can ever really get. For him, the chase itself is the whole point, not actually getting there.
But it's not just the outside world that's messing with us. Schopenhauer argues the real war, the real struggle, is happening internally. This is the battlefield inside you.
Schopenhauer saw our inner life as a constant war. Think about it. You can only really be one thing completely. Let's say you're a thinker. But that doesn't mean the other parts of you just disappear. The part that wants to be a doer, a person of action, or the part that wants to be a socialite, they're still in there, always fighting for their turn.
And the consequence of this is huge. You are the arena where this fight happens. This internal battle is totally unavoidable, and it always involves some kind of pain. In every single decision, one part of you wins, which means another part of you has to lose. For Schopenhauer, that's just the fundamental condition of being alive.
Okay, so we've looked inward. Now let's turn to Schopenhauer's unvarnished and, famously cynical view on how to deal with other people.
Schopenhauer uses this really blunt analogy to make his point. He says, people are basically like dogs. They don't care about your 100 amazing qualities. What do they care about? Who pats them and who feeds them. He's saying that most friendships are really just built on what's useful and what's in it for them. Expecting people to see your deep inner value, in his view, that's just setting yourself up for disappointment.
And this leads to a pretty wild conclusion, right? Having tons of friends isn't necessarily a good thing. For Schopenhauer, people with real insight often have very few friends, precisely because they see the flaws and the self-interest in others way too clearly. So in his world, being alone can actually be a sign of intellectual strength.
Now, beyond our own internal battles and our tricky social lives, Schopenhauer says there are these other huge forces running the show, and most of them are completely out of our hands.
He personifies these forces, and it's brilliant. So, who's the king of our world? Chance. And his family, well, you've got error, his brother, folly, his aunt, and malice, his grandmother. What a crew, right? This isn't just him being a downer, it's a strategic point, that our lives are shaped by randomness, by mistakes, and by other people's bad intentions way more than we like to think.
So, how are you supposed to live like that? You have to adopt a new mindset. See all your good fortune, not as something you've earned or that you deserve, but as a gift from a really moody ruler. That way, when your luck inevitably turns, you won't be screaming about how unfair it is, you'll just get it. What chance gave, chance has now taken away.
And that brings us to the final and I think the most important section. Given all this tough stuff, the illusions, the inner conflict, selfish people, the rule of chance, how in the world are we supposed to live? Well, this is Schopenhauer's practical toolkit.
His advice is super direct. First, get a really clear-eyed look at what you're actually good at and what you're not, and just live that way. Learn to accept things as they are. That's resignation. Stop obsessing over what you don't have, because that just makes you miserable. And most importantly, build a rock-solid sense of your own inner value.
And this is where he just flips the whole script. For Schopenhauer, happiness isn't a positive feeling, like joy or pleasure. Real contentment is a negative state. It's simply the absence of its two biggest enemies, pain and boredom. If you can get to a place that's free from those two things, you've basically won the game.
And he says, nature actually armed us against these two enemies. Cheerfulness is our natural shield against pain, and intelligence is our shield against boredom. But here's the catch. He points out they're hardly ever found together in high doses. The genius is often kind of gloomy, and the super cheerful person is often, well, not the deepest thinker. He says fate is actually doing you a favor if it pits you against the enemy you're best equipped to fight.
In the end, all his advice really leads to one final safe harbor. The most powerful comfort you can have, the one thing that lets you get through all the unavoidable suffering of life, is an unshakable awareness of your own inner worth. That's the fortress that no amount of bad luck can ever break down.
And that leaves us with this final thought to chew on. Schopenhauer's whole philosophy really challenges our modern obsession with more friends, more success, more joy. He asks us to think about a totally different way. What if true contentment isn't about adding more stuff to your life, but about wisely and gracefully needing less?